Hi, I'm Justin Moorman.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social-emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life. All right, welcome to episode 23, If I Ruled the World, People Over Programs. I feel like I said that very fakey. I feel like I turned on like a certain voice in that one. I don't know. Here we are. No, people over programs. We're going to be talking. Actually, do you want to talk? You are talking a big game about how you're taking it away.
So the dynamic is going to switch today. So everybody get excited. I am going to take more of the lead on hosting this one. I think Justin gets asked this a lot. Like, what's the program? How we have some really behaviorally kids with some behavioral challenges that come, and somehow magically they always do really well with Justin and we never have any issues. People say, well, what's the program? How do you do it?
Maybe overstating how great I am. Let's not.
Not that there aren't things, but it never feels wild, right? Or out of control, or right. So what's the program, right? How do we do that? And so this came up because I think we're going to talk about, is it a program? And I think this is something you're really passionate about, and I'm kind of excited. Usually it's me getting fired up about stuff. I'm kind of excited about Justin talking about this episode today.
I'm off guard now. Now I don't know what to do with myself in this episode.
Should be a good dynamic. So let's just get into it. Why can't trauma-informed care be a program?
Well, I think to start, you said it right. Like, I think this is a question that we get asked a lot. We get asked, what should I do when? Right? Like, so they want more, a lot of people want to know, what do I do when a kid runs out of a building? Or what do I do when, when a kid starts cussing at me? Or what do I do when, and it's usually centered around a situation, right? Mm-hmm. So what that automatically insinuates, and people aren't asking this in a malicious way. Like they're wanting to help. They're wanting to solve a problem. They want to improve their practices. Yeah. Great way of saying it. And I think, but I think what that kind of question lends itself to is like this almost math problem that we talk about a lot, like A plus B equals C. Like, okay, so a kid cusses, I do this thing or say these words, I get the result. The student stops cussing, the world goes on. Everything's fine. And I think that's not how it works. And like what we find with programs in general, doesn't matter what kind of program it is, they're going to hit probably about 80. I can give you a program. Like, we can find a program. I can try to create a program myself, right?
Yeah.
But it's going to catch probably about 80% of the kids.
That's tier one.
Yeah. 85% of the kids. I don't know, somewhere in there. And then there's going to be about maybe 10% of the kids, 15% of the kids that it only kind of works for, and they probably need something else. And then you're still going to be left with about 5% of the kids.
The tier three.
Who the program doesn't work for. And I think that's hard for people to hear. And I think, but here's part of why I think that's hard for people to hear is because a lot of companies and a lot of individuals are really good about marketing and trying to create a packaged thing to sell people. And my gosh, if you could convince a school that if they just did all of these things and say the script like we have it, and I'm not going to say like specifics. I was going to make a real mean comment about a very specific program I know about, but I won't.
Yeah.
If you just do these things, then all the problems in your school go away, right? And so principals hear this, staff hears this, superintendents hear this.
It's a quick fix.
Oh my gosh,
we'll just buy this. Yeah.
Let's do it. We're going to be all in on this thing, and you get to the end, and what you really find is still there's probably going to be about 5% of the kids that it doesn't really work for. And it's not really catching them for whatever reason. And there's still about 10% of the kids, 15% are going to need more help still. There's about 80% of the kids who honestly didn't need the program in the first place, who are bought in and they run with it, right?
Yep.
So it's really hard. So I think and I think I was even talking to a guy when we were first starting up the podcast, and well-intentioned guy, and he doesn't work at our school. Sometimes I feel like I need to say that so that if people that work at our school, I don't know how many people that work at our actual school even listen to this.
Yeah.
But I always feel like I need to say that. Doesn't work at our school. But he said, I think the trauma-informed care stuff that you're talking about, that kind of program would probably work in in like a setting like yours, but it wouldn't work in some gen ed rooms. And I was like, and it was interesting because I had talked to him a lot about stuff. And he's not currently like a teacher or anything like that. A little bit older guy. And I thought it was interesting because again, like it was this idea that everything that's talked about is it has to be a program, right?
Yeah.
And so we had this then discussion that it's like, well, here's the thing though, like approaching students like in a trauma-informed way or however you want to describe it.
Yeah.
That's not a program. It's really a way of, again, we talk about this all the time. It's kind of a way of seeing kids and viewing the world kind of around you, as opposed to like a program that we implement.
Yeah.
And that's hard for people then, because then what do we do? Right.
So there's not like desk, you don't set at your desk a certain way or put this like schedule up or do this like paperwork with the kids ahead of time, right?
So it's asking me to bang my head against the wall year after year, right? Yeah. Because whatever I've got this year for my caseload, that's going to dictate
what your day looks like.
It's going to dictate what my day looks like. It's going to dictate how I run my room. So we talk about this quite a bit just in our current setup. So this is my third year in the district that we're in the building that we're in. So 2 years ago, right, it looked one very specific way because of the setup that we had.
Yep.
Right? The kids that I had, the caseload I had, and at the time what I was being asked to do. Right? So then last year, it looked completely different. Now, I had a plan going into last year, and that plan got upended literally like 8 minutes into the first day. Because I was like, oh, this is how this is going to work this year. 8 minutes into the first day, I found out, hey, what my plan wasn't going to work. A student that I thought was going to be really cool with being able to go in to a gen ed room in an inclusion setting and maintain in there relatively well wasn't all of a sudden.
Yep.
8 minutes in, right? And then I thought, well, I didn't just give up. We tried some things, but it became clear pretty quick. I had to completely change my approach, and I had to come up with a new plan, because what I wasn't going to do is keep trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. Right? That's not how it was going to work. So I had to completely change. So my year last year looked completely different than I planned on. Right. And I went, out of my way. That's not, I made sure to let gen ed teachers know, like, hey, this was the original plan. This no longer can be my plan. So this is now what we're working with.
Because we need to keep kids regulated. Yeah. We need to keep kids safe.
Yeah,
and we need to make sure everybody's getting an education, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So here's how we're going to make it work for my caseload of kids that is still in inclusion. Here's how I'm going to make it work for the kids that are just hanging with me, because that's what they need a lot more. And here's how I'm going to make it work for you guys as far as support and whatever goes. Coverage, all the things. And it looked completely different than what I planned on.
Yeah.
And then this year, it looks different than what it did last year. And there's different approaches, and there's different places that I feel like I need to be in. There's different ways that we have to adjust. There's not a program. There's not if you just go in and sometimes that's what happens, right? Like somebody wants to come in and watch. Like, well, they'll come in and watch Justin's room. And let's see, so that we can try to like recreate that same thing in another building.
Yeah.
The problem with that is you might see what my room looks like that year or
that moment,
week,
that day,
or that whatever, but it's not necessarily, that's not the key
with those kids.
That's not, that's not the thing that's solving it. A program that we're going to like try to then mimic somewhere else. It's the approach, it's the way of seeing kids and how they interact. And then like those concepts that we've talked about a lot for 22 episodes, right? It's all of those things that go into like the decision-making, the willingness to make certain kinds of decisions. So it's tough. So there are some like pretty consistent like trauma-informed approaches that can be universal that we can talk about. And we have talked about on the podcast. I don't think we need to sit here today and, go over them, ad nauseum again. But I think there are some universal things that you can put in place. But it's not really a program that can be packaged, even if people are trying to do that. And I think the other part of why it can't be a packaged program that sometimes people miss, and that really is kind of the crux of this whole episode, right, is that students are bringing their own very specific like history and experiences to your classroom.
I wrote down the same thing.
Well,
we're on the same page.
Because it's probably for the best, right?
Yeah.
So there's not a programmed approach that's going to address every student's needs, because there can't be a programmed approach that knows very specifically how, you are, what your whole history is. And so again, it doesn't mean that there's not general things that we can do. And again, baseline, I think 80% of our kids, just by you doing, any given teacher doing like their normal stuff, they're gonna be fine, right? And then we need a little bit more for about, again, 10, 15%. And then there's 5% that we have to really make some adjustments for, or some some different decisions need to be made for, you know. But I think that's part of why that is. Kids are individuals. That's why. That's one reason why it can't be a programmed approach. And then I think that other one again is that you're going to miss kids in any kind of program you build.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking the same thing, that really, we talk about trauma-informed care, that it's really story, trauma, events, experiences. Each one of us are so different, and you don't know the people till you have to build the system with the people, right?
Yeah.
So you can't prematurely say, this is what it's going to look like. I'm just going to do these things, or set up my room this way, or do this, and then we're going to see shifts. Like, that's not how it works with the science. So how does trauma-informed care work inside a classroom system? So we talk a lot about this through the podcast. So let's just say, as we do some transferable things over to maybe less of a specific setting that maybe you're in, think about how can trauma-informed care look in some of our classroom settings.
Sure. So again, I think it's that way of seeing the kids and the way of interacting with them overall, as opposed to like that specific program like we talked about. And so what gets tricky about that overall is that you're a very different person than I am. Yeah. Right?
Yep, absolutely.
People our classrooms take on our personalities, which is fine. I think that's why I don't like program stuff, is because then it's asking, well, every classroom has to look kind of the same. And that's we're losing a lot in that, I think.
Yeah. Our gifts are different.
Yeah.
The way I approach kids, my personality.
Yeah.
Everything is just different, but it works really well for some kids, and your personality works really well for some kids, and how we address things. Yeah.
And that's fine. And that's actually good for kids to have those different experiences, that they don't have to just have like a robotic approach from every teacher, that they can have those individualized approaches. So I think what you can do is, again, you take that personality and you take some of these concepts we might talk about and understand that they work different. They would work different for Katie than they will for me. Josh would look different with them than he would, either of us. There would be some crossover between all three of us.
Yeah.
All those things. So some like of those general components. Anytime you look at trauma-informed care, one of the first things you're going to always see is safety. You have to have like kids feeling safe. And here's what is going to potentially fire people up, right? Is because I don't think there's a teacher out there that's like, you know what? I'm really terrible at keeping my kids safe. If I had to say what my weakness is, it's classroom safety. Like, nobody's going to say that. Everybody feels like they're doing their best to keep everybody safe. And so I want to give like a little bit of an explanation of what that means, because again, I don't want people to think that means that you have to treat your students with like kid gloves, like nobody can be offended, or like ever, we don't want to hear safety in like the worst context. So because most people again are keeping their kids safe. Like that's what they're doing. So a good easy example of this is like, you might have a kid who, we just talked about this not too long ago at a presentation, but like you might have a kid who constantly, they're constantly looking back at the door. Constantly looking back at the door. Nothing crazy is happening in your room. Nothing outrageous, nothing unsafe is happening in your room. But this kid is really struggling to pay attention and is always looking back at the door, because they may feel unsafe with their back to the door.
Yep.
That's not like, you're not an awful teacher because a student feels unsafe with their back to the door.
That's their trauma history.
It's just, for whatever reason, it's why they feel that way. And so a simple adjustment would be to pay attention to your kids, right? And find that student in this situation, hey, move their seat to where they can face the door. They're facing the door more. And now all of a sudden you've eliminated like this huge amount of what to a student feels like a safety issue for them.
Yep.
You've eliminated it. Doesn't mean that like that kid was getting pounded in the face by somebody every day and it was like physically unsafe for them to be there. But if they were feeling unsafe, then we make an adjustment, right?
Yep.
To help that student feel safe all of a sudden. That's what I mean with safety. I mean, obviously we don't want people getting pounded either in our classrooms. You should be able to keep your kids safe. But I think it's that next layer down that we sometimes don't think about, that really is the biggest deal in a general education classroom, right? Our everyday classrooms, is look for those little signs that maybe it's odd that this kid keeps doing this one thing. I wonder if there's something to that. I wonder if it's because it's too loud in here. And that makes them feel like it's just, it's like an unsafe situation. Like they feel just so dysregulated. And I can make like a small adjustment to help them feel safer and more at home in the room. Though that's the safety I'm talking about. in addition to like the keep everybody safe, obviously, the main one. I think stability, consistency, predictability, we talk about that a lot. Those are always like things that come up with trauma-informed care as well. And so however you are, unless you're awful, I guess, but however you are, be consistently that way. This is why I think self-care and knowing yourself is super important as well, because if you, which we talk about a lot, but if you know yourself well, you know when you're doing well or when you're going through what a couple episodes ago, a rough patch. If you're going through a rough patch or not, and then talk about the human side of you in whatever age appropriate way is to your students, right? So high schoolers are going to get it in a much different way than what, a kindergarten class is going to get it or a middle school class is going to get it. But I think humanizing yourself to the kids, to the students, is helpful, because then when you are having those hard days, you're able to explain that and explain why, in whatever age appropriate way you can. And that helps build that consistency and that stability, as opposed to those kids like guessing every day. But if you keep yourself in the most stable spot you can, in the most regulated spot you can, through your own self-care and things like that, that's going to be huge to helping your whole class feel like there's stability. So what you don't want is those kids walking around, and we say this multiple times, we'll continue to say it, we don't want them guessing which Mr. Moorman they're going to have today. Am I going to have the one that's like flying off the handle when I go to sharpen the pencil without asking? Or am I having the one that's like, oh yeah, just get up. You don't have to ask me. Like, consistency. Like the kids need to know, like they don't want to be guessing on those things. Yeah. It's hard.
I also thought about like our episode on class. We did one on classroom regulation. Instead of thinking about classroom management, classroom regulation. My room feels really dysregulated right now. How can I put some systems in place for the regulation? The relationship practice, we keep on going back to that. So some of those things, as we talk about the tier 1 level of trauma-informed care, and really looking at kids instead of saying what discipline protocol do they need? What experiences do they need or interventions they need so we can shift behavior? Behavior really is a symptom that we can help put experiences and interventions in place. I think that's more of the tier 1 approach in terms of trauma-informed care. And those things all go back to professional development and understanding the neuroscience and, some collaboration, communication type things that you can't bottle up in a I can't tell you to go do this, and this, right? Yeah. And that's the thing.
Well, and I think some of those even shifts in language used to bother me, right? Like it used to bother me, some of those shifts in language, but I've had to remind myself over the years that really words and language are powerful and they hold a lot of weight. And so changing even something, because somebody could easily say like, well, what's the difference between providing a kid an experience and disciplining a kid if we ultimately are doing the same thing? Yeah. Well, there may not be. Maybe in your mind, discipline it's you end up in the same way as providing an experience, but there's like a difference in language, and I think sometimes that matters. It may not matter to you, but it matters to people overall. Yep. And I think that should be a willingness, hopefully a willingness for us to acknowledge that and to try to make adjustments, even if we don't agree with it. Yeah. I think there's been times that stuff's been pointed out to any of us, right? Stuff's been pointed out to me before, and I'm like, I feel like that's excessive. But you know what? At the same time, if I want to continue to be able to reach people and communicate with people well, then maybe I just need to make the adjustment as best I can, and I'm not going to be perfect, but I'll try to make the adjustment and catch myself and not use this term or not use this phrase or whatever it might be, even if I don't personally have the internal reaction to it. So I think that language piece is kind of important to sometimes shift. I think the other thing that we can do as far as stability goes too is provide like kids with the with like a heads up on changes that are coming. Yep. Right. So that if all of a sudden what has been stable and consistent is going to be different, then to give them a heads up instead of just shifting it. And that goes really for every age too, because you think about yourself as an adult, like you don't love it if all of a sudden stuff's just different without any heads up. Yeah. Like actually people get really fired up about that. Yeah. Like they get really upset about that. Yep. Because it's a super dysregulating thing to think that one thing's going to happen.
I have to wrap my head around that now.
Yes. Yeah. And so students are no different, whether it's a high schooler or whether it's like a little kid. Because I think sometimes we stop doing that as kids get older. Yeah. Because we're like, oh, they'll handle it like they're fine. That's like a little kid thing to do. That's not the case. Think about how mad you are when all of a sudden somebody tells you like what protocol is and how it's completely different now. And you're like, but wait, and there was no warning. We didn't talk about it. Like what?
It's just
like,
a thing now. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so I don't
You
know,
know,
recognize
another
that.
thing that comes to mind I think you do really well is the pre-correction, like getting
Sure.
kids set up, which I think maybe you don't even notice, right? That, but it just need to see you when you're working with kids, just that pre-correction, like, hey, you're about to go into do this.
Yeah.
Think about what your plan is. What are your goals? You know, like
Here's your
some of the,
options.
like do a lot of that pre-teaching, that pre-correction piece is the trauma-informed care. We're talking about like getting kids ready for those experiences. And I think that's a really important part as we're talking through components that you have to look at. But again, you can't put that in a program because you don't know what the kid is, what the expectations are, what the experiences are. You just have to read the room and try to work through or coach through those pre-correction opportunities.
We have to understand you have to understand how the brain works, right? And you have to understand that trauma background and those trauma approaches. I think that's part of that is understanding that. And if you don't understand that, then you're not going to see things different or have the eyes to be able to recognize what needs to shift, right? I think I do a lot too. I try to do a lot of even, and again, slightly different role, but I think in a gen ed room, you do the same thing. Like, hey, instead of we're going to do something that may be rough for kids. Like maybe it's a tough concept they're going to learn. It's going to be a tough math lesson. They're not going to get it. You know, it might be that we have this drill that's going to be potentially scary.
Yeah.
What sometimes we do is we're like, people can land in a spot where like, hey, this is going to be fine. We're all going to do well. We're going to do great with it. And then you get into it. Again, this is slightly stealing this from that one of the Chris Voss videos, you know, that never split the difference. But this idea, it's like, I think the example he uses is like if a doctor says, hey, I'm going to give you a shot. It's not going to hurt at all. Don't worry about it. And then they give you a shot and then you're fired up because it hurt.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, like that hurt. What in the world? You just lied to me.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying like, hey, listen, I'm going to give you the shot. It's probably going to hurt a lot. Like, I'm sorry I have to do it, but it is what we have to do. And then they give you a shot and you're like, oh, you know, that actually wasn't that bad. Like, thanks for the warning. It's the same idea, right? To approach like maybe the math lesson. Hey guys, we're going to learn this new concept. I'm going to be honest, it's going to be a tough one. Like we probably don't know it. You know, we don't get it.
Getting yourself prepared.
But I want you to know, like, we're going to be in it together and we're going to work it out. And we're going to figure it out. But man, it's a tough one today. Then you go into it, that's going to give a whole different feel to your class than like, hey guys, we're going to do this math lesson today, new concept, but you know what? We're going to get it. You guys are going to do great with it. Well, then if I'm sitting there and I'm not doing great with it, I'm thinking like, crap. Like everybody's doing great with this and I'm not. Like everybody's smiling, everybody seems happy about it, and I'm stuck. And I don't know what to do. And everybody said this was going to be easy and it's not. And so am I dumb? Like I better just get out of here. You know, I go to the bathroom, I get mad, I rip up my paper, whatever it might be. I just shut down. I just don't do any of it or ask for help. I'm just sad. I go home and tell my parents how I don't understand what's happening in math, you know? As opposed to like, hey, that was really tough, but I did kind of get that one part of it, but you know, they said it was going to be really hard. So like, I don't, you know, it's just it's those shifts that I think help us, prep kids. It's that pre-correction, but you can do that for things that aren't behavior. And I think doing that for things that are tough concepts, it's a good idea because it really preps those kids to be more successful and it prepares their brain to accept it better.
Yeah, so we're talking through like really big shifts, right? So if we're looking at like school districts or school-based programming, what are you addressed some of them, but like the biggest lens shifts that we really need to take on?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that a lot of schools are doing in general now, and kind of also maybe goes with the last question as well, but I think doing some of the general kind of tier one, like SEL kind of like social emotional learning kind of curriculums, teaching. It's almost like math, like a new math program or something. We were talking about a math program not long ago in one of our meetings at school. And somebody was saying like, hey, we're just now starting to see a lot of the payoff, it seems like, where kids are really knowing the language. They're knowing what to say. They're getting like the idea of I think the example was a fraction, right? The kid said like, well, it's a fraction. And like I had never even taught the word fraction yet this year, but like that language was built from previous times. And I think it's the same thing with social emotional learning and like the SEL kind of curriculum. If you are teaching it as a baseline tier one, like everybody's getting it kind of instruction, then what you're doing is you're building capacity over time.
Yeah.
But I think you have to do it in a way that's not like pushed to the side, like just kind of getting through it.
Got my 15 minutes in.
Yeah, like I just did it to check off a box.
Yeah.
Do it, and you may have to do it. I get that you may also have to do it to check off a box, but But I think to do it in a way, take it seriously and know that what you're building upon is you're laying a really great foundation for the future. Because then once kids, if we're doing this all the way through, then when a kid's a junior in high school, my gosh, they've really experienced a lot of training really in how their mind works, how their body feels, all the things.
Yeah.
And they're much more equipped to be able to accept bigger shifts that happen, or at least have common language to be able to express the things that they're going through and the help that they need. And so I think that's a big one to kind of start off with, is like to start seeing that not as a box to check, but as a like an important training tool that's really going to pay off in the end. You know, because I think sometimes we can get into the spot, and we can do that with everything. I mean, we can do it with a reading thing too. We can do it with where you get into that mode and you're like, this week I feel like I'm just checking the box. Yeah. I'm not saying that. I'm saying like if our overall attitude is just to like kind of get it out of the way and not see the importance. It is important, and it makes a big difference because we can really build on stuff in the future, I think, with that.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this week's episode. We're going to rejoin Justin and Katie next time to finish this great topic that's got lots of things to talk about. So, in the meantime, get out there and do the work. Thanks.
Hey everybody, let's keep the conversation going.
Like and subscribe below and keep the comments rolling.